angst of a lot of persons involved in this, but as I mentioned, whether or not it comes in and goes beyond the production is a different matter. The order I've read, I'd like to change it to say that the order of the Department of Health to produce it in a sealed envelope to me. As I mentioned to you, we have a rule on the civil side that allows, it's called privilege law. And any attorney that claims a privilege, and I'll accept the fact that the state is claiming that privilege for the benefit of the victim in this case, and not have to have a specific lawyer to do that. And when that is done, then the documents are presented to the court in camera for an in-camera review. And the court makes a determination as to whether or not there's any material that is relevant to the particular action or is privileged. I'll start with the premise, all medical records are privileged as far as I'm concerned. So the only thing that would cause it to shift out of that would be if it has some probative value to this proceeding. And I'll make that determination. Those matters that I determine that are not have any probative value, I'll reseal the envelope and I'll type an order that said this can only be opened by further order of the court. Obviously, it becomes necessary to review the book materials to see whether I made the right choice as to something that I did or did not disclose. Then that would be if the court could review it, but no one else will review it. So we'll do it in that fashion.
Well, thank you very much, Your Honor.
Very well. So if you'll change the order just to present it to me for my in-camera review, and then put that I will release any materials that I deem to be appropriate to you with the restraints that are contained, that would be only for your benefit. And frankly, I think we have to have a hearing, if necessary, to show it to anybody beside the two of you, the attorneys. And I'm not saying he's not entitled to it, but I think we need to have a specific hearing as to why that becomes necessary before it's disclosed to anybody else. And then the order also, at the conclusion of this matter, he would return those materials to the solicitor and they would destroy them.
Yes, sir.
If you will make that correction or change, I'll be happy to sign your order.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So let the record reflect Mr. Moore is present. Anything from the state before we proceed?
No, sir.
Anything from the defendant?
No, sir.
Let me say to everybody, this is a day I will always remember, and I'm sure you do as well. And it's a day that I hope we will always commemorate for the brave souls that did a lot and for this country and what it did in standing up and doing something. And let me say to the people of Conway, what a privilege it was to drive across that bridge today and see those men and women holding flags up. It warmed my heart, and I thought that's exactly what we ought to be proud of. So thank you all for that, and surely started my day with a bang. I can tell you that. So, okay, let's bring in our jury, please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Had a good evening. As I mentioned, we will first act of business is, as each juror, will each juror solemnly swear or affirm that they have honored the court's instruction fully and specifically in that regard, not spoken to anyone, not allowed anybody to speak to them, not viewed any news accounts, not read any articles, and not conducted any independent research. If you have, say aye. I do.
I do.
Any member of the panel unable to make that commitment for any reason, please raise your right hand. Thank you very much, and thank you for that as well. I appreciate your willingness to continue to do that. And before we start, this day I just spoke to everyone here. I will always remember it, and I hope we always remember what occurred on this day in this country, and the men and women that sacrificed dearly for what this country is all about, and continue to do so. And it's an important day for me, and it brings back a fond memory because I remember I was trying a case just like today. And I had my computer up, and the bailiff came and said, a plane just hit the tower. And I thought, my first thought was, well, must have gotten off track. I don't know how in the world. And then the second one hit. And he said, we're at war. And I heard that this morning as well. But when the jury came in, I told them, they'd been in the jury room, and that they hadn't heard anything, and I shared that with them. And I said, I don't know what your feelings are, but I respect those feelings. I said, you may have relatives in New York, you may have friends in New York, you may be concerned about it, you may want to get home to be with your loved ones, whatever you want to do. I said, I'm willing to do whatever you want to do, but for me, somebody wants to shut this country down. This country's bigger than that, and we can go forward. And I said, I want you to go back in your jury room and y'all talk, and if anybody wants to stop, we'll stop. I'll never forget it, because excuse me, they came out and they said, we want to work. And they said, God, I'm proud to be a part of this community. So thank you all for being a part of this community and doing what I said to you, the service that you're rendering by doing what we do today. Thank you all. Now, with all of that, we're ready to begin, and we'll give you attention to the next witness. It's Melissa. Good morning. You may call your next witness.
Thank you, Judge. At this time, the state calls Danny Furr.
Raise your right hand, place your left hand on the Bible. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give the court in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Proceed. Just get your full name and spelling.
Okay. Danny Furr, F-U-R-R.
And if you don't mind, Mr. Furr, tell this jury where you're currently employed.
Horry County Police Department,
And how long have you been at the police department?
20 years.
And tell them a little bit about what your current position is.
My current position is sergeant in the training division. I handle the training for personnel within the department on all levels.
Okay, and you worked with Horry County Police Department in December of 2013?
Yes, I did.
If you don't mind, tell this jury a little bit about what your responsibilities were at that time.
I was a corporal on patrol division in the South Precinct, which encompasses the area that we're going to speak about today. And I was running the shift. The sergeant that night was off, so I was actually running the shift of personnel underneath me with supervisory issues, help on calls, advice to them on how to handle calls.
Okay, and were you working the night of December 17th, early morning of December 18th and 19th?
Yes, I was.
Okay, tell this jury, did you happen to assist in the investigation of the vehicle being at Peachtree Landing?
I did, yes.
And if you don't mind, tell them what you did to assist with that investigation.
Once my subordinate had taken the call, he notified me once on scene that he was out with a vehicle that had been abandoned or left at Peachtree Landing. At that point, he advised me of the situation, and I progressed from there into attempting to locate who we thought may be missing.
Okay, and was that Heather Elvis?
It was.
Okay, and what did you do? And before we get too far, who was the subordinate you talked with?
Casey Canterbury.
Okay, and after you talked with him, where did you go to locate Heather?
Tilted Kilt Tavern.
Okay, and did you talk with the people there?
I did.
Okay, and after you talked with the people there and gathered information, who did you call?
Sidney.
Okay, and were you able to get the phone number from the people at Tilted Kilt?
I was, yes.
Okay, and about how long did you talk with those people?
I was probably there for 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, and why did you go to Tilted Kilt?
I was told that that is where she worked. Heather Ellis worked.
Okay. So you were looking to see if she was there or if she was supposed to work?
I was actually seeing if she was actually at work, and if she wasn't, when she was going to be working again.
Okay, and you were there about 10 or 15 minutes.
I wasn't.
And after talking to the folks there, you called Sidney Moore.
I did.
Did you call anybody else?
No, I did not.
From your investigation and talking with them, did you see a reason to call anybody else?
No, I didn't.
Okay, and when you called him, did he pick up the phone?
He didn't.
Okay, and then what happened?
He called me back. I left a message. He called me back.
Okay, so he called back. Did he call back from the phone number that you reached out to?
He did.
Okay, and when he called back, did you talk with him then?
I did.
Okay, and was there, could you tell if anybody else was on the phone other than Sidney?
I couldn't. I just spoke with him.
Okay, and about how long did you talk with him?
Maybe 3-4 minutes.
Okay, and was this during the nighttime hours?
It was.
Okay, and if you don't mind, tell this jury about the first conversation you had with him.
The first conversation I had was, of course, I identified myself, who I was, and what I was calling him in reference to. Once we spoke about me looking for Heather or a possible location for Heather, and that she may be missing, she may not be, I asked if he could shed any light on it. Did he know anything? Did he know where she was exactly, so that we could kind of put this to bed? Because it was, for us, it was just, at the time, we just couldn't make contact with her.
Right.
It's usual, it's not unusual. He stated that he had spoken to her in an extended time, 6 weeks, I believe. And then we kept talking about, how they knew each other, what drew them together, what was going on there. And then he made the statement that that she had called him and they had spoken that night.
Okay.
And that he had just called her to tell her that to leave him alone,
Okay.
to not call, not make any contact with him anymore, which concerned me because the first time it was I haven't spoken to her 6 weeks, and then it was I just spoke with her to tell her that it wasn't, don't call me anymore. So that kind of drew me to the conclusion that we needed to do a follow-up
Okay.
with, with what was happening.
And how early on was this?
This was right after I had left
Okay.
the attempted kill. It was early on in the investigation.
And did he tell you anything about his relationship with Heather?
He said that they had a relationship, a romantic relationship, but it was over.
Okay. And originally he said it was over and he hadn't talked to her?
He did, yes.
And then he said, I had talked to her?
Yes.
So once that unfolds, what do you do?
Once that unfolds, it was pretty obvious to me that I needed to send somebody over there, either myself or Casey Canterbury, who was the lead on the case, to speak with him further. So that's what I did. I notified Casey Canterbury to go to his residence to speak with him.
And at that time, what was your primary goal?
My primary goal is just finding Heather.
Okay.
We assumed that he may have a little bit more information about where she may be, and maybe he just wasn't comfortable with speaking with me on the phone, so I felt like a person-to-person conversation would be better. Maybe we get more information about where she was.
Okay, so at that time, there is no investigating of a crime, don't even know if a crime's been committed, we're just trying to locate this young girl?
No, yes, it's just a matter of location. Yes.
And did you call anybody else other than Sidney Moore during that time frame?
No, I did not.
No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
Cross-examine.
Officer Furr, good morning.
Good morning.
I want to take a moment and, if you wouldn't mind restating the position you held at that time.
I was a corporal in South Precinct Patrol Division.
Okay. And you were the supervisor of that precinct, as I understand it, correct?
Yes, I was at that time, yes.
All right. So, now I imagine you've received various forms of training as part of being an Horry County police officer, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you employed that training that you received in your participation in this case?
Yes.
All right. You graduated from the South Carolina Police Academy?
Yes.
It's called
I did.
Criminal Justice Academy?
Yes.
Okay. And is your training experience pretty much limited to what you received at the Criminal Justice Academy and any subsequent follow-up training?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, when you're there, when you're receiving that kind of training, I guess you get an overview of basically whatever it takes to be a police officer.
Yes.
Before you go into various forms of specialization.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So at that point, you talk about various, for example, the legal basics, or the basics of the legal system.
Yes.
You talk about what's necessary for an arrest warrant, for example.
Yes.
Correct? And what is necessary for an arrest warrant?
Probable cause.
Probable cause, okay. And you learn about preparing various reports, correct?
Yes.
For example, an incident of any kind, preparing a report is pretty important. Would you agree?
Yes.
And that's because it's used by the prosecution, correct?
It is.
It's used by the reviewing officers in various administrative capacities, correct?
Yes, it is.
And people make decisions based on what you fill out in the report.
Yes.
And at different times, you're often, well, let me ask it this way. If you fill out a report, you ideally want to do it close in time, correct?
Yes.
Whatever the event was. Because it may be months, years before you have to come back and testify.
True.
Correct? And so your memory is usually much stronger at the time the incident occurred than it would be testifying at some point much later.
Yes.
Right? And I imagine you also learn to talk about gathering statements from witnesses.
Yes.
Right?
Mhm.
Because I imagine in investigation you want to have a record as to what they actually said, not what you remember they said.
Yes.
Right? And that's why you learn to try to take witness statements as soon as possible. Right?
True. Yes.
And that's a generally accepted principle that you learn in the Criminal Justice Academy.
Yes.
Right? Now, in this case, did you prepare a report?
I did not.
Okay. And do you know if Casey Canterbury prepared a report?
He did.
And he would have prepared that report close in time to the...
He did.
Correct?
Yes.
Hold on
And,
just a second. If you both will pause just a minute, you have to remember something, that somebody's taking down everything we're saying, and when you ask before he's finishing his question, you create a problem. So let's allow the question to be asked before you answer.
Okay.
Thank you. Excuse me.
no problem. Okay, so you believe Mr. Canterbury did fill out a report in
Yes.
this case? And that was done close in time to the investigation, at least his involvement, correct?
Yes.
Now, also, I guess at the Criminal Justice Academy, there are various basic aspects about a crime scene, correct?
Yes.
In terms of preserving the crime scene.
Yes.
I'm sure you don't go into the details, but you understand the various resources that you would have at your disposal, such as various CSI professionals that can investigate the scenes.
Yes, absolutely.
You learn at least the basics, or how to be aware of, excuse me, things like fingerprints, correct?
Yes, sir.
How DNA may be present in different circumstances.
Yes, sir.
Things like touch DNA,
Yes, sir.
hair strands, things like that.
Absolutely.
Okay. And you understand that at different points, various experts can be engaged, for example, with regard to even footprint indentations in different
Yes.
circumstances. Okay. Tread marks can be identified in other circumstances.
Yes.
Even sometimes on a hard surface. True.
True.
For example, a tread mark could be utilized by way of the dirt that's been accumulated on the tire, and that can leave an impression that can be under the right circumstances.
Well, I don't have specific training in that, but take your word for it.
Well, what I'm asking is, you're trained to at least identify and look for those types of issues, correct?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Okay. And that's standard with any crime scene, correct?
Yes.
Now, as it would relate to missing persons cases, I would imagine that it's safe to say that anytime you're dealing with a missing person, time is valuable. Do you agree?
Oh, yes.
Resources, particularly the early responders, are very scarce, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. I'm going to go back to your involvement in this case. You got involved on, was it December 19th, is that correct?
Yes, whatever the night, the initial report night was. It was early evening in the shift.
Okay. Let me ask you this, did you know Mr. Ellis, your victim's father at that time?
No, I did not.
Okay. Do you know if Mr. Canterbury had a previous relationship or knew Mr. Ellis at that time?
I did not know that, no.
Okay. Do you now know?
I do know that, yes.
Okay. All right. When you went to the Tilted Kilt, you spoke to a man named Dennis Hart Sr., correct?
I don't think his name was Dennis.
Do you remember who you spoke to?
Yeah, he identified himself as the manager, a male.
Okay. Was he a male kitchen manager?
I don't know what his title, he just said, man, he was not standing at front when I came in uniform. I asked for a manager, can I speak to a manager? And he presented himself as such.
did this individual that was the male manager at the Tilted Kilt, did he, well, let me back up. Did you make it clear that you were looking for anybody that may have communicated or had any kind of contact with Heather in the recent days or weeks?
I did.
Okay. Now, did this manager mention anything about his son being close with her or having any type of recent communications with her?
I'm going to object because we haven't established yet who Mr. Furr talked with.
Thank you very much. You can ask the question. If he can answer it, I don't know. You would have a chance to follow up on redirect over rule.
Can you repeat that?
Absolutely. So the manager that you spoke with, did he, well, like I said, let me rephrase, did you make clear that you were looking for anybody that may know anything regarding Heather Ellis?
Yes, sir.
And you were looking for anybody that maybe communicated with her regularly, correct?
Yes.
Because in a missing person case, you often look for two different classes of people, correct? And what I mean by that is you're looking for people that maybe have seen her most recently,
Mhm.
true? But
Yes.
also people that have frequent communications, true?
Anybody who can shed any light on communication, where she may be, that's what I'm looking for.
Okay. So, like I said, this individual that was identified as the male manager at Tilted Kilt,
Mhm.
he did not volunteer or give you any information indicating that he had a son that was close friends or communicated frequently with Heather Ellis.
No, he did not.
You conceal that from me.
Well, he didn't
Well,
tell me.
rephrase that question, because you have to establish that it was he. Thank you, sir. So that's a proper question. Under 611A, rephrase it.
He did not disclose to you his knowledge of any relationship or friendship or communications between his son and Heather Ellis.
No, sir, he did not.
He did not volunteer that to you.
No, sir.
Okay. Let me ask you this. At that point in time, based on where you were in the investigation, had you known that his son had had frequent communications or was a close friend, would you have asked to speak with him to see if
Oh, yes.
you would have?
Sorry. Yes, I would have asked, yes.
Now, based on this discussion with the manager at Tilted Kilt, let's be clear, he never indicated any type of violence or anything that made him appear to be a threat in terms of Sidney Moore.
No, he did not.
Okay. He just told you, listen, Sidney and her used to have a relationship at some point.
That's right.
When you called Sidney, he confirmed that right off the bat.
He did.
All right. And when you spoke to Sidney, you said that you make a point of saying that he had not spoken to you.
Yes.
Okay. Is it possible that he mentioned or he stated that he had not seen her in the 6 weeks?
No, I remember spoken to. That's what prompted my next action was the answers he gave me in the conversation, the two separate answers.
So, I mean, again, I know a lot was going on, but you're saying it wasn't possible that maybe you misheard or that
I don't think that's possible, no.
it's not possible, okay? It's been 6 years, you've not filled out a report, correct?
It was Casey Canterbury filled out the report. Yes.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. If Casey Canterbury has in his report where he indicates that you said that Mr. Moore had indicated that he had not seen her in 6 weeks.
He
would that
did.
be untrue?
He did write that.
He did write that?
Yes.
And that report was prepared
That night.
contemporaneous with the
It was.
investigation, correct?
Sir, allow him to finish asking the question.
Sorry, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. So yes, that report that indicated what we just talked about was prepared contemporaneous with his investigation on the night of, or the day of the 19th, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, based on that conversation you had with the manager of Tilted Kilt, you then direct other officers to speak to Sidney, correct? To go to his house?
After my conversation with Sidney is when I directed them to go.
Okay. And what time of night was this?
Oh, I don't know.
Not only an exact time.
10:30, 11 o'clock.
Okay, so it was late, it wasn't?
It was late.
It was late at night, right? And it's safe to say at this point, are you already I know you indicated that you didn't believe he was a suspect at this time, but was there anything unusual about the way he reacted in terms of following up on this particular investigation?
What is there, say that again?
Well, let me ask you this. Casey Canterbury went to Mr. Moore's house at 10, 11 o'clock, correct?
I'm not sure when he went. He went subsequent to after my conversation with Sidney.
So sometime after 10 o'clock? Casey?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Did other officers go with him?
Yes.
In fact, Brian Scales and Mr. Scott Calderwood both went with Mr. Canterbury.
Yes.
All three officers went to Sidney's house sometime after 10 o'clock, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, is that standard operating procedure to divert three officers at a time when time is so valuable, resources are so scarce, to speak to one person that is not a suspect?
I only dispatched one. The other two officers worked a different part of the county. I'm not sure how they got involved in this. I dispatched one because he wasn't a suspect. It was just a matter of obtaining information about where Heather was. If I had thought that there was a problem, I would have dispatched more than one. But he wasn't a suspect. I sent one over there just to follow up on some information I received.
Okay. So those other officers, were they at Officer Canterbury's instruction?
I'm not sure how those officers came to be with Canterbury. I don't know how that occurred. I learned of their presence after Canterbury had left the scene, but I don't know how that occurred. They worked at a different precinct with a different supervisor. I'm in South. They were from Central.
Okay. Questions over?
Sir?
No further questions, Mr. Lady Shaw.
Redirect.
Just a couple, Judge. Mr. Boucher, do you remember him asking you about the kitchen, or the manager that you spoke with at Tilted Kilt?
Who? Do I remember who asked
The
me?
defense attorney
Yes.
asking you. Okay, do you know or remember the manager's name that you spoke with?
I remember it to be Matt,
Okay,
but I
so,
don't remember the whole name.
okay, so you just remember his name was Matt.
Mhm.
So you don't remember him to be Dennis Hart Sr.,
I don't.
the kitchen manager?
No, I do not.
Does that name even ring a bell to you?
I've heard the name, but I've never spoken to him.
Okay, so it was not Dennis Hart Sr. that you spoke with at the Tilted Kilt?
No.
It was another guy named Matt?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you know if Matt had a son, or,
I don't.
okay. But you did not talk to Dennis Hart?
I did not.
Okay. He also asked you some questions about dispatching Casey Canterbury out to Sidney Moore. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Now, did you dispatch an officer out there just on the manager at Tilted Kilt's word, what he told you?
I dispatched him out there because of the information I received from the manager. Yes.
Okay. How about Sidney Moore? Did anybody meet with him in person prior to your conversation?
No.
Okay, so nobody met with Mr. Moore until after you spoke with him?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and why did you then send an officer out there?
Because the story during our conversation had changed. During our conversation, the timelines changed a little bit.
Okay, so something about...
So I felt like we needed to further the investigation with Sidney.
Okay, so it was what the defendant told you that
Yes.
led you to send somebody out there?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Recross. Judge.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
And you wish you to be excused.
Please.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
You also free to leave, sir.
Thank you, sir.
On the next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the state calls Officer Casey Canterbury.
raise your right hand, place your left hand on the Bible. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give the court in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please proceed.
Casey Canterbury, last name Canterbury.
Mr. Canterbury, where are you employed?
Florida County Police Department,
And how long have you been employed there?
a little over 9 years.
What's your rank?
I'm a Lance Corporal.
What's that mean?
You're a PFC for the first 5 years, and then after that, you're a Lance Corporal until you get promoted to Corporal.
Did you receive any kind of training to become an officer and a lance corporal?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about your training, please, sir.
I went through the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy, graduated there, and I'm taking numerous classes since then and training every year to keep my certificate.
So you continue education?
Yes.
So it's fair to say you climbed through the ranks since you became an officer?
Yes, sir.
Obviously, you were an officer in December of 2013.
Yes, sir.
And what was your rank back then?
I was a PFC.
Okay, what does that mean?
I work patrol, answering calls for service.
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to become involved in this case back then?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that involvement, please.
There was a call for service at Peachtree Boat Landing about a suspicious vehicle, and I responded out to it.
And when you arrived at Peachtree Boat Landing, when did you arrive?
It was at night. I don't remember the exact time.
Do you remember the date?
Just on the, if I look at my report, it gives exactly just the 13th, I think.
If you saw your report, would that refresh your memory?
It was,
Your Honor, may I approach?
If you mark it first, please.
Yes, sir.
By the identification. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm showing you now what's been marked for identification as states number 57. Please take a look at that and take your time, sir. Do you know when you responded to Peachtree Boat Landing in response to a suspicious vehicle?
it was on the 17th of December at, or no, I'm sorry. Give me one second, I apologize.
Take your time.
It was the evening of the 19th when I was there.
Okay.
Sorry.
Do you know approximately what time?
It was after dark.
Okay. Now, when you responded to Peachtree Boat Landing, what did you do? What did you see? Tell us about that experience.
I observed a vehicle parked on the, as soon as you come in to the right side facing the waterway or the river.
What kind of vehicle?
It was a, give me the exact. I believe it was a Dodge.
Okay. So was it a car or a truck?
It was a vehicle, passenger vehicle.
Was it occupied?
No, it was not.
Did it appear to be in good working order?
From what I can tell, yes.
Were the tires flat?
No, they weren't.
Were the lights on?
No.
Were the doors open?
No, sir.
Were the windows down?
No, sir.
All the windows were up?
Yes, sir.
Did anything about the car to you make it appear to be inoperable?
No, sir.
Okay. And you said it was facing the river?
Yes, sir.
Did you see anyone around the car?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you see any signs of a struggle?
No, sir.
Did you see any items around the car?
No, sir.
You didn't. Did you see any keys?
No, sir.
Telephone?
No, sir.
Pocketbook?
No, sir.
Did you see any people at the landing?
No, sir.
When you get to the landing, is there a swamp on one side of the landing?
There is.
Is there a trailers on another side?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to see the swamp?
I knew which area it was. It was dark outside. You can't really see a whole lot.
Did you have lights on? Your headlights?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And was there light from the moon?
Yes.
Okay. So if there was somebody in the river, you'd have seen it?
Yes.
In the swamp?
Yes, sir. I also had my flashlight.
So the bottom line is you didn't see anything but the car at the landing?
Correct.
And the car appeared to be completely operable?
Correct.
All right. What did you do after you responded and saw the car?
I ran the South Carolina license plate on the back of the car.
How did that come back?
It came back that it was not stolen and registered to Mr. Terry Elvis.
What'd you do then?
I responded to the address associated with the tag.
To Mr. Elvis's address?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember what address that was?
105 Sly Fox Trail.
I'm showing you now what's been marked for identification purposes is State's Exhibit 56. Do you recognize what that is a map of?
Yes, sir. The map of Horry County.
All right, and is that a fair and accurate map of Horry County?
Appears to be, yes, sir.
How long you lived in Horry County?
All my life, 38 years.
You've proved well familiar with the layout of Horry County.
Yes, sir.
All right, Your Honor, at this time I would seek to introduce States 56 in evidence.
Objection. Without objection, States 56 is submitted.
Permission to publish, Your Honor.
Made.
Okay. Can you point out on this map, if you'll come down here for just a second, I'll move this out of the way. Thank you, Ms. Lancer. Can you point out where Peachtree Boat Landing is on the map where you responded to?
Officer, if you go on that side, so you'll be talking back to this direction.
Yes, sir. Peachtree Landing's here.
Okay. And do you see where Sly Fox Trail is on this map? In the general area, it may or may not be marked.
We'll be down in this area.
Okay. So you went from Peachtree Boat Landing to Sly Fox Trail?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you can take a seat again. Thank you, sir. And when you got to Mr. Elvis's house at Sly Fox Trail, tell me about that encounter. Who'd you talk to?
Talk to Mr. Elvis.
And what did you tell Mr. Elvis?
Asked him if he owned the Dodge, the vehicle, and if he knew why it was at the boat landing or who was driving the car.
What did you do next?
He told me that his daughter Heather, that was the car that she drove, but it was registered to him,
And then?
but that he had no idea why it was down there. That's what he also told me, that he had last spoken to his daughter on the 17th of December at approximately 10:43 p.m.
Okay. Did you respond back to Peachtree Landing?
We did. Mr. Ellis said that he had another set of keys to the vehicle, so I escorted him over to the boat landing where the vehicle was.
You drove and he rode with you?
Right.
What'd you do when you got back to the landing?
We looked at the car. I looked around, again looking around the boat landing with my flashlight. With him being the registered owner of the car, he opened the car.
Let me back up real quick. So this is the second time now tonight you've been to the landing.
Correct.
At either time you went to the landing that night, did you hear anything?
No, sir.
You didn't hear any people?
No, sir.
Did you see anything suspicious?
No, sir.
Would you say it was dark at the landing?
Yes, sir.
No lights?
No, sir.
No cameras?
No.
Okay. So you and Mr. Elvis respond back to the landing and you let him access the car. Why did you let him access the car?
Because he was a registered owner of the car.
Okay, fair enough. And it didn't come back reported stolen?
Correct.
When you accessed the car, did you open the doors or did he?
He unlocked it. I don't recall which one of us actually opened the door.
Let me ask you this. Did you ever touch the car?
I did.
So you touched the car and Mr. Elvis touched the car?
Yes.
Did you wear gloves?
We did.
When you say we, you and Mr. Elvis?
Yes, sir.
Why did you wear gloves?
In case it moved forward to anything else or there was any kind of evidence in the car, preserve anything that possibly we would find or anything at that point.
Well, did you know a crime had been committed at this point?
No.
Did you suspect a crime had been committed at this
No.
point? So would you say this was out of abundance of caution?
Correct.
So, but the car was locked and had to be unlocked by Mr. Elvis?
Yes.
When he opened the car, was anyone in the car?
No.
Tell me about the inside of the car. What did the inside of the car look like?
It was a mess. There was stuff everywhere inside the car.
When you say a mess, be specific. What was in the car? As specific as you can be.
It was filled with belongings, apparently of Heather, being that it was her car.
When you say filled, could you get in the car?
Yes,
The driver's seat?
correct.
Could you sit in any other seat in the car?
There was stuff in the passenger seat and the back seat was full.
So you would have to empty out the car to get in?
Correct.
And any other seat other than the driver's side seat?
Correct.
So there wasn't a lot of room in the car? Okay, fair enough. Would you say you followed a normal operating procedure as you processed the car or looked in the car?
Yes, sir.
Okay. About how long did you spend at the landing? Well, let's go back to the first time before you went to Mr. Elvis's house to pick him up. How long were you there?
I don't recall the actual time period.
How long, when you returned with Mr. Elvis, did you spend at the landing?
It was obviously longer time than it was before because we went through the car.
Inspecting the car?
Right.
Fair enough. When you got back to the car with Mr. Elvis, did you hear anything at the landing?
No, sir.
See anything suspicious?
No, sir.
Was the landing any different when you returned with Mr. Elvis than it was the first time you were there?
No, sir.
Did you see any foul play as you were inspecting the car?
No, sir.
Inside the car, did you see any signs of a struggle?
No, sir.
Did you find any illicit substances?
No, sir.
Any weapons?
No, sir.
So after you and Mr. Elvis inspect the car and you made a determination that there was no foul play and no signs of a struggle, what did you do?
I allowed Mr. Elvis to take the car back to his house
And why did you do that?
because it was his car and it was not stolen.
So you didn't at that time have the authority to impound the car?
No, there was no reason to at that point.
Did you respond back to Mr. Elvis's house with him?
I did.
But you didn't see any reason to take the car to the police department?
No.
When you got back to Mr. Elvis's house, what happened?
After he was back to the car, correct?
I'm sorry?
After he was already back.
Yeah, after y'all get back to Mr. Elvis's house, was he able to provide you with any more information?
Yes, sir. He pulled up the phone records for Heather's phone.
Did he appear to be concerned about Heather's whereabouts?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So he was able to provide you with phone records,
Correct.
and he did provide you with those phone records.
Correct.
Did you inspect those phone records?
Not at that time.
Okay. What did you do next? Did you talk to anybody?
I did. I talked to her roommate.
How did you reach out to her roommate?
I called her on her cell phone.
How did you get her cell phone number? Was it off the phone records Mr. Elvis provided?
I believe so.
Okay. Did you document the number that you called her on?
I did.
And if you don't mind looking at your report if you need to, can you tell this jury what number you called to reach out to her roommate and what her name was, please?
It's Brianna Whirlman. And the phone number I called was 609-412-3938.
Okay. So after you talked to Brianna, did you do anything else? Did you reach out to anyone else?
I did.
Tell me who else you reached out to.
Steve Schiraldi.
And how did you get Steve Schiraldi's phone number?
He had been on a date with Heather and he got her from Mr. Elvis, from the phone records.
From the phone records that Mr. Ellis provided.
Yes, sir.
Why did you choose to call those two numbers? Why did you reach out to those two numbers in the phone records?
Brianna Reed was her roommate,
Uh-huh.
and then Steve Schiraldi had been with her the last time that Mr. Elvis had talked to his daughter.
And were you able to actually make contact with Bree?
I was.
Were you actually able to make contact with Steve Schiraldi?
I did.
And were you able to garner information in furtherance of your investigation?
I did.
Do me a favor, and if you can, look on your report if you need to and tell this jury what number you reached out to Mr. Schiraldi on.
Mr. Schiraldi, the phone number I had was 443-624-6288.
Okay. And I'm going to show you now what's been entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 5. Well, actually, if you wouldn't mind, step down here one more time for me, Mr. Canterbury. I know I got you up and down, but it's necessary, sir. And you remember that number you just told me? I want you to look on States 5, and again, this is already in evidence, and I want you to find that number. And every time you see it on this record, 6288, 6288, that number you just read out to this jury, I'd like you to write Stephen's name beside it, if you don't mind, sir. Each one, each individual one, please. Take your time, not in any hurry. I believe you got it, sir. Was what Mr. Shirati told you consistent with what you see in the phone records? His communication with Ms. Ellis?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So did you find anything suspicious about, go ahead and sit back down, I'm sorry. So after reviewing the phone records in conjunction with what Mr. Shirati told you during your investigation, did you find any more reason to investigate Mr. Shirati?
No, sir.
Okay. Was what Brianna Worrellman told you consistent with what you saw in the phone records at Mr. Ellis gave?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What else did you do, sir? After you spoke to Mr. Shirati and you spoke to Brianna Worrellman, what did you do?
I spoke with my corporal, then it was Corporal Danny Furr. Explained what I had. We talked about where she worked, which said Tilted Kilt, which he had gone up there while I was with Mr. Ellis.
And subsequent to that, did he instruct you to follow up with anything?
Yes, sir.
What did he instruct you to do?
He asked me to respond over to Mr. Moore's house to speak with him.
Mr. Moore, the defendant?
Yes,
Did you respond to Mr. Moore's house?
I did.
And about what time, if you can remember, was that?
I would say between 1 and 2 a.m.
Okay.
I entered my supplement at 3 o'clock.
Okay.
Sometime before that.
And you enter those supplementals as quick as you can after an event occurs?
As free time permit between calls.
I understand. Were you able to make contact with Mr. Moore?
Yes, sir.
Now let me ask you this, prior to going to Mr. Moore's house, did you make contact with him?
I have not.
Okay, you just responded to his address?
Correct.
Okay. Did you call him before you went over?
I didn't, Danny Furr had made contact with him.
And arrangements were made for you to meet the defendant at his home?
Correct.
Okay. Going back to States 5 real quick. Did you recognize any of the other numbers after Mr. Shirati's? Did you recognize this 2462 number?
No.
Okay. How about this 444-2462, you didn't recognize that number?
No.
How about this 385-3175?
Yes, sir. I have that one in my report.
Okay, tell me whose number that belongs to.
Mr. Sidney Moore.
Okay. So the last number on the record is, on Ms. Ellis' record is belonging to Sidney Moore?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you documented that in your report? That his number is 3175?
Yes, I did.
Okay. When you got to his house after 1 a.m., what occurred? Tell me what occurred.
He walked out from the house, out of the driveway, out into the street where we were parked.
So he met you outside?
Yes.
You didn't go up to the house?
No.
Did he come out with anyone else?
No, he did not.
Did you have were you in a squad car?
I was.
Was anyone else with you?
Yeah, 2 other officers.
You remember who that was? Right.
Brian Scales and Scott Calderwood.
Were y'all suspecting him of a crime at that point?
No, sir.
Were you there to arrest him?
No, sir.
Did you arrest him that night?
Did not.
Did you talk to him?
Yes, I did.
And was that conversation recorded?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And have you listened to that recording since?
I have.
All right. I'm showing you now what's been marked for identification that states 55. I want you to take a look at that envelope and what's in that envelope and tell me if you recognize what that is.
Yes, sir.
Tell me what that is, officer.
It's a DVD of the video from myself with Mr. Moore.
Video, does that mean dash cam?
Dash cam, yes.
And that's from inside a squad car?
It is.
And does that accurately reflect the interview that you had with Mr. Moore on that night?
Yes, sir.
Has it been tampered with in any way?
No, sir.
Let me ask you a question. Have you watched this recently?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time I will seek to admit and publish states 55 in the evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Without objection, states 55 is submitted. And you may publish.
Thank you. Officer, while she's getting that ready, you said he wasn't under arrest at all. Okay. While she's getting that ready, you said he wasn't under arrest.
No, sir.
Did he volunteer to speak with you?
He did.
Okay. One more thing I'd like you to do. That number that you documented for Mr. Moore, would you step down one more time before we watch this video? And well, actually, let's get Ms. Miller to do it. Ms. Miller, if you wouldn't mind stepping up here so we can keep the handwriting consistent. Let's publish one more time what that number was that you documented for Mr. Moore.
The number was 843 385 3175.
Why don't we hear anything right now?
When you activate our dash cams, it immediately goes back 30 seconds, and there's no audio at that time.
Neat.
Okay, one, Canterbury? My number is, something for us or something? I think off Canterbury, I want to talk to you. Come right out here, we'll find your house. What's your name now? Sidney. Okay. Show y'all, I don't know why y'all here, but it's, I don't know why y'all here. Pretty good, how are you? You call it football first? Something, pro or something like that? I can play the voice there, or I can call it. Where you I think the last night or the night before, I can't remember. Very well relationship, and I broke it off. Still like the other night, all the glue it up, like. And let you have second awareness of everything that I've already done the last one. 360 seconds to back and forth between your phone number and her phone number, and at least showing on phone. And that, in the last 30 days. So, tell me what they're calling this. Her cell phone number. Wednesday night, and I think you got your o'clock in the morning, in the morning time. Probably like, we were like 2 or something like that. Where were you at when she was trying to call you? We was up in bed, we were in bed, we were like, at any point, did you go down around Peachtree Lane there? Yes. So there's nothing that's gonna show up to you in that area? Yeah, that's all right. Yeah. And so when we pull track records, we show, we get a roll, you be where your thumb's been, and you'll anywhere in Peachtree Lane. Well, I told you that earlier, so I said, look, if she calls me or something, I will call you. I just looked at that and I'll call you. And I didn't say I won't call. I'm not going to call that flat out. And I just let him know, hey, let me call the police. They think. And I mean, I found I don't say it. That's what she is. Okay, fine. So we're good on that thing, I can call you. As long as you don't show up, I'm fine. He has no idea. Okay. No, he's not gonna show up. He's just not testifying. You're the, obviously we're already talking. Well, no, I mean, I understand, because, you know. You're not making an appointment, she's had where she's going to go. I want to know if she's dating one of the beer guys who still killed, and that's it. Like, is she still living? I have no. Yeah. I think it's better, right? Other than, again, other than swear up, but I guess I don't know if they have any 21 to drive for, I think they do. Did you hear his name? Oh, no. No, just somebody to give him shit one day there, because I think some of the people that do each other. But and I think it was still working? No. When I let you hit me and I told him, I said, look, I can't open the door, my wife said, so I said, all right. I appreciate it. No problem. No problem. All you have to do is
Mr. Canterbury, that was the substance of your interview with Mr. Moore, right?
Yes.
Did you have any more interaction with him that night?
He came back out a few minutes later from the house.
And what was that like?
He asked us to leave.
And did you leave?
We did.
Was that statement given voluntarily?
Yes, it was.
Was he placed under arrest?
No.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about that statement because it's kind of muffled because y'all's dash cams are notoriously bad. So, when he came out, did he have anything in his possession?
His cell phone.
He did have a cell phone.
Yes.
And did he present that cell phone to you?
He did.
Do you remember why? Did you ask for it?
He was looking through it and voluntarily showed it to me. He was showing that he had not texted the victim since November the 2nd.
Okay. Did he mention that he had spoke with the victim that night?
No. During the interview, he said that he had spoken to her since October.
Okay. And was that consistent with the information you had already garnered during your investigation?
No.
So is that why you were kind of pressing him at one point to give you information? Okay. So you would say there are inconsistencies with what Mr. Moore gave you and what your investigation already revealed?
Yes, sir.
And that was pursuant to your conversations with Bree and Stephen?
Correct.
Do you remember if there was a vehicle at the house?
I don't recall looking at the vehicles.
Well, I don't mean looking at them or inspecting them. Were there any in the driveway?
There were vehicles there, yes.
Was there a truck there?
I don't recall what was there. I just know that there were vehicles in the driveway.
Did Mr. Moore ever tell you his truck had been stolen that night or anything?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. Describe the area of the house. Is it bright?
Mr. Moore's house?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't.
Is it dark?
Yeah.
Is it a main highway or is it a dead end road?
No, it's a dead end road.
Okay. Is there a lot of traffic on that road?
No.
What's across the street from Mr. Moore's house?
There's a electric substation.
Okay. Now, do you know if that electric substation, who owns that, who that belongs to?
I believe it's already electric today.
Do you know if it's equipped with video surveillance?
I do not know.
Do you know if it was equipped with video surveillance back then?
That's right, I don't have no usually.
So is what Sidney told you consistent with what Bree told you about her conversation with Heather?
No.
Let me ask you this, did Mr. Moore tell you anybody else was home?
His kids were in the house.
Did he say his wife was home?
Don't know, I believe she was, but I don't recall.
Did she come outside?
No.
And y'all were there in squad cars?
Yes.
How many?
There was 3 of us.
3 different squad cars?
Yes.
And Mr. Moore's the only one that came out of the house?
Yes.
Through the course of your investigation, were you able to determine where Heather Elvis actually lived?
Where she? Yes.
Can you tell the court and the jury where that was if you look at your report?
Her address was 541 White River Drive, apartment 16C.
And if you wouldn't mind, for the last time, come down off the stand. I'm going to show you what's been marked on the big map. It's 56 and entered into evidence. State's 56. Indicated. And sir, you might need your report if you don't mind for the rest of this, because we're going to go ahead and do all these simultaneously so you don't have to get up and down. Read that address to the jury one more time, sir, and try to indicate that on the map if you don't mind.
The address was 541 White River Drive, apartment 16C.
And is that address indicated on this map?
Yes.
Can you point that out for the jury, please? Were you able to determine where the victim, in this case, Miss Heather Elvis, worked?
Yes.
And where was that?
The tilted kilt?
Do you know where that is?
I believe it's in this area here.
Is that, and what is that area?
Broadway at the beach.
Broadway at the beach,
Sandy
okay.
Myrtle Beach.
Again, you located her car where?
Peachtree Lane?
Okay. Were you able to determine, obviously you were because you met him there, where Mr. Moore lived?
Yes, sir.
Will you point that out?
Right here.
And do the locations you just indicated on this map that's been entered into evidence accurately reflect these locations?
Yes, sir.
All right. You can take your seat, sir. So after you interviewed Mr. Moore and you determined inconsistencies were made, did you wrote a report, obviously.
Yes.
Did you do anything else in conjunction with this investigation?
That's what that was in there.
Court's indulgence, Chair. Sorry. How many cell phones did he come outside with?
1.
Did he indicate to you they had any more than one cell phone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did Mr. Moore ever tell you that night during the course of your interview that he had reached out to Miss Elvis via payphone?
No, sir.
Did a payphone come up at all during the course of your interview with him?
No, sir.
You didn't bring it up?
No, sir.
He didn't bring it up. Had you had any indication at that point in your investigation that he had called her from a payphone?
No.
Let me ask you this question, Officer Canterbury. Had you known Mr. Moore called Miss Elvis earlier that night from a payphone, would you have addressed that with him?
Yes.
Would that have changed the course of your investigation?
Yes, sir.
You would have acted differently?
Is that yes?
Yes, sir.
Did he say anything about any other phone he had called from that night?
No, sir.
When you left from your interview with Mr. Moore, did you have any indication from your interview and your interactions with him that he had reached out to Heather Ellis that night at all?
No, sir, I didn't.
Please answer any questions that the defense may have.
You may cross-examine.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Canterbury, good morning.
Good morning,
Talk a little bit about your training. You went to the Criminal Justice Academy, correct?
Yes, sir.
And we heard a little bit about that earlier, so I won't rehash it in detail, but you learned about preparing reports, right?
Yes, sir.
And crime scenes,
Yes.
correct? Dealing with the public, things of that nature.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to go through, when did you say you received the call of the suspicious vehicle?
According to my report, it says it occurred on 12/17/2013, 10/4. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. That was the last time that Mr. Ellis had spoken to me. I entered my report on the 19th at 11:10 p.m., so just before that, or a time period before that,
Okay, so shortly before 10 p.m. is when you responded to landing?
I believe so,
Okay,
yes.
so it was dark outside?
Yes, sir.
Now, whenever you ran the tag and it came back to Terry Elvis, did you know Mr. Elvis prior to that?
I met him, yes, sir.
Okay. On how many occasions have you and him spoken before approximately?
My father and I used to have a shipping store, and he shipped things, and I know his brother as well.
So you know him relatively well?
Yes, sir, I guess you could say that.
Okay, all right. He was not a stranger, in other words?
No, he wasn't a stranger.
Okay, it was somebody you knew? Okay. And did you have a phone number for Mr. Elvis, or did you have the ability to obtain a phone number for Mr. Elvis?
At that time, I did not have his phone number.
So you then, without the phone number, go to Mr. Elvis's residence, which was his residence registered to the license plate, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as you were speaking to Mr. Elvis, or during the course of this early investigation, was there any significance between, or any connection that you were aware of regarding Heather Elvis and Peachtree Road or Peachtree Boat Landing?
I knew she grew up here in Horry County, but I didn't know of any connection.
Did you know if the family owned any kind of property close by that landing?
No, sir, I didn't.
Have you learned of any of that since this time?
No, sir.
Now, at that point, after you met with Mr. Elvis, he rode back with you to the landing, correct?
Correct.
And at that point, was that when he already had the phone records?
I think he already had, I don't recall when he got them. I think it was afterwards I went back to the house.
Okay, all right. Now, when you get back to the landing, is it safe to say at this point, it's at least in your contemplation that this could be a crime scene?
All I was investigating was a missing person.
I understand, but you thought to put on gloves, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you thought to have Mr. Elvis put on gloves?
Yes.
And I believe you also immediately asked that the trunk be opened to be inspected, correct?
We looked at the trunk as well.
Sure, which would be standard in a procedure like this, right?
Yes.
So it's at least contemplated, given that we've got a missing girl that no one has spoken to in some period of time, that this could be a crime scene.
At that time, we had no idea if it was a crime scene or not. We were looking for information in there that might lead us to where she went.
So it could be a possibility, but you had not made a conclusion one way or another.
Correct.
All right. Now, given that that was the case, and given that it was dark, did you, before the car was released to Mr. Elvis, did you take any efforts to document the vicinity of the vehicle or the contents of the vehicle? In other words, did you take any pictures of the scene using your flashlight to show any items that may have been in the vicinity of the vehicle that was parked?
I don't recall if we did pictures or not.
Okay. Did you take any pictures or document any of the various items that may have been inside the vehicle for any future use, if it was to be necessary?
Give me a second, let me mark one. I don't recall if I took any pictures.
Your report doesn't indicate that.
Correct.
All right. And given that, had you done so, you probably would have indicated that in your report, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, during the course of your involvement, did the name Jeremy Fleming come to your attention? Take your time.
It did.
In your investigation, did it indicate that Miss Elvis and Mr. Fleming had been in a romantic relationship?
Yes,
And it had been in that romantic relationship up until recently, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And did your investigation indicate that the relationship between Mr. Fleming and Miss Elvis, at least some allegations of abuse involved?
It was brought up, yes, sir.
Now, just a moment. Now, I understand that Officer Furr indicated you to go to Mr. Moore's residence, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. But you went and, in the course of that time, two other officers came with you, Mr. Scales and Mr. Caldwell, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And they were not part of your precinct, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So all three of you arrived at the Moore residence after 10 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay. Very late, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, at this point, even though you've arrived at the Moore residence at the instruction of Mr. Furr, were you aware of Mr. Schiraldi at that point?
Give me 1 second, I'm sorry.
Take your time.
Restate the question, I'm sorry.
Okay. Did you become aware of an individual named Stephen Schiraldi during your involvement?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. And your investigation indicated that she had been on a date with Mr. Schiraldi the night before?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, after concluding your conversation with Mr. Moore, did you go and seek to interview Mr. Schiraldi that same night?
I did not.
Okay. Let me ask you this. You were aware that he had been on a date with her the night before, correct?
Correct.
So to your knowledge, at this point in the investigation, this was the last individual that you knew to have actually seen her in person, correct?
At that time, I believe so, yes.
Okay. And you did not initiate, or nobody, at least at this point in time, initiated an attempt to go to the Schiraldi home to speak with him or just gather any information he may have known regarding the previous evening. Is that safe to say?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this. After hearing what you had heard regarding Mr. Fleming, did you at that point initiate or make any attempts to try to direct officers to Mr. Fleming and try to get any information he may have regarding his timeline or his knowledge regarding Miss Elvis?
At the time of my report, I didn't have a positive identity on him or how to get in touch with him.
Okay. Did you undertake any efforts to try to identify or find that information?
I don't recall being able to find any information.
But do you recall seeking it or looking it out or using any of the resources that the Horry County Police Department has to see if you could find a phone number?
I don't recall.
Okay. All right. And it's not indicating your report?
No, I indicated in my report that I was unable to positively identify.
Okay. All right. Now, when you showed up at the Moore residence, you were, you already had phone records, correct?
Correct.
All right. And we heard on the video, you're asking, you're talking to him and saying, I think at one point I noted that you're hindering the investigation with your comments to him. Do you remember that?
I don't believe that was my comment. There was another officer.
You heard one of the other officers mentioning that, is that correct?
I heard him mention that if you know where she is, you need to tell us and not hinder the investigation.
Not hinder the investigation. Okay. That wasn't you speaking, that was one of the other officers?
No, I believe that was another officer.
Okay. All right. Now, and you're asking him at this point, very detailed questions about any communication Sidney may have had in the previous, going back to the time they were in a relationship, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, there was also a quote, and I'm a little confused here. Somebody tells him, or I think Sidney asked, as long as he doesn't show up, and somebody affirms and says that he's not going to come by. Do you have any idea who they're referring to when they're saying he's not going to come by?
Mr. Ellis.
Mr. Ellis. Right. In fact, Mr. Ellis had already called after he had left your vehicle, he'd already contacted Mr. Moore directly, correct?
Correct.
And was that a, if you know, was that a kind of a confrontational conversation?
According to what yes.
At least he took it that way, in other words.
Correct.
All right. So at that point, were you aware of him having called 911 after that phone call?
Mr. Moore called me.
Right.
I was advised that there was a 911 call, yes.
Okay. So would that explain the reason why he was waiting outside whenever you all were approaching?
I can't explain why he was already outside.
Okay. Well, that would not be inconsistent with somebody that had filed or just called 911 and was expecting
No,
police
this-
officers, right?
People do come outside.
Right, sure, I understand. Okay. Court's indulgence.
Certainly.
No further questions for the witness, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Yes, sir. Mr. Bouchette asked you about when y'all said something about hindering the investigation. Remember that?
Yes, sir.
Was that brought up because the information he was giving was inconsistent with the information you already had?
Yes, sir.
He also brought up your interactions with Mr. Elvis. Was he cooperative with you?
Yes, sir.
He gave you the phone records you testified.
Correct.
Did you ask for those phone records?
No, he provided.
Was it your impression that he was trying to assist you in finding his daughter?
Yes, sir.
And finally, he asked you about someone named Jeremy Fleming. Do you know what his phone number is?
I did not have a phone number for him.
Okay. I'm going to show you one more time State's Exhibit 5. Actually, if you'll just come here one more time, please, just so I can make sure everybody sees this. You identified a lot of numbers. Let me put the map over here. This is what I'm distracted. This is huge. You identified a lot of numbers during the course of your investigation. One was Heather Ellis, correct? You also identified 3175 as Mr. Moore's, Sidney Moore's.
Correct.
Am I correct?
Yes, sir. Objection to the lady.
I apologize. I'll rephrase. Did you identify Sidney Moore's phone number?
I did.
Did you identify it as 3175?
Yes, sir.
Did you identify Heather Ellis's number as 8152?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to identify Stephen Schiraldi's number?
Yes, sir.
What were the last 4 digits of his number?
6288.
Were you able to identify Bree Worrelman's number?
Yes, sir.
Tell me the last 4 digits of her number.
3938.
All right, now on State's Exhibit 5, what are the last 2 numbers Miss Elvis had contact with? And I believe they're down here.
It was a 3175 number.
And we identified that one as belonging to who?
Mr. Moore.
Tell me about the number prior to that. Read that number out to the jury.
1-843-444-2462.
Were you able to identify that number?
No, sir, I was not.
Please have a seat. Ms. Miller, if you'll step up here one more time, ma'am. I apologize, but if I write it, everybody's going to regret it. If you'll write that number down as Mr. Canterbury reads that out to you one more time. Mr. Canterbury, State's Exhibit 5, that second to last number that she had contact with. Read that to Ms. Miller for me.
1-843-444-2462.
And that's the second to last number her phone records indicated she had contact with. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
And again, were you able to identify who that number belonged to?
No, sir.
Looking back now, do you think that's of significance to know who that belongs to?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to know, for purposes of your investigation, who that number belongs to?
I would.
Let me ask you a question. Hypothetically speaking, say you found out that number
Objection, Your
belongs.
Honor.
I don't know what the question is yet.
He asked you about Jeremy Fleming. Say you found out that number did belong to Jeremy
No,
Fleming.
no, you can't hypothetical because he doesn't know that, so I'm sorry. State your question without using a hypothetical. What's your question?
If that number belongs to Jeremy Fleming, would you interview him?
Yes, sir.
Nothing further.
Recall.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Right. wishing to be excused.
Very much so, sir.
You're free to leave, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen, at this point, let's take a recess. We'll let you go to your jury room, get up to any deliberations. We'll be with you in about 10 minutes. Anything from the state before recess?
No, sir, Your Honor.
Anything from the defendant?
No, Your Honor.
We'll be in east for about 10, 15 minutes.
Yes, sir. Let's go. Yeah, I'm sorry, Tom. You got a badge? I'm going to ask a lot. I looked over the first part.